voice when we started, but we are here for a terrific episode today, and we are going to be speaking about to many, a well-known actress, maybe to some of the younger set, not so well-known. Basically, there's been a term in Hollywood for some blonde bombshells. There were the three M's. It was Monroe, Mansfield, and Mamie, otherwise known as Marilyn Monroe, Jane Mansfield, and Mamie Van Doren. This lady, who was the subject of the book we're going to be speaking with the author about, was an actress, a singer, a pinup model, and her name was Joi Lansing. And again, she was in a number of things, and we're going to try to cover as many as we can. The book that we're going to be delving into today is called Joi Lansing, A Body to Die For, a love story by our guest joining us via phone from California. Alexis Hunter is her name. And Alexis, we welcome you to Studio 411. How are you today?
I'm doing great, Larry. Thank you so much. It's nice to talk to you.
Very good. Same here. Now, tell me, usually with authors, I say, well, what was the inspiration for the book? Well, anybody looking at the camera certainly can tell what the inspiration was, but kind of fill us in. The book is not a life story of Joi. It's really a 4 to 4.5 year span, correct, of when you guys kind of met.
Yes, it is. It covers the time from the time I met her until the time she passed away in 1972. And
now, tell me, when did you meet her? You met her on a film set, right? But you had admired her for a long time.
That's the fun part of the story is when I was a kid, I used to watch Joi on the Bob Cummings show, and I just thought she was I was just absolutely fascinated by her. And years went by, and I grew up, and I moved to L.A., and a friend was doing playing a Bigfoot monster in the film Bigfoot, and got tired of wearing the monkey suit and asked me if I wanted to do it. And I said, sure, I want to be a star. And I went to the set, and suddenly I find out that the woman who I was just absolutely crazy about when I was a kid was starring in the show, starring in the movie Bigfoot, and we became friends, and that's how it all started. It's an amazing story.
So you watched her, like you said, on the old, they called it Love That Bob, or the Bob Cummings show.
Right, and the Bob Cummings show.
And
yeah.
That was on for about 4 or 5 years back in the mid to late 50s. And
right.
Of course, for some of the folks watching us today, again, she was one I know that I remember as a kid. As a matter of fact, as we look of a photo here of baby Joi, and then of course Joi is probably a 20 or early 30-something starlet here. So Joi Ray Brown, born in Salt Lake City back in, 1929, correct?
Yes.
There you go.
Yes, she was born in 29.
And now, just to clear up something, because I know, so we don't confuse people. Now, you were born where? Were you born in Hawaii or here in the States?
I was born. I'm a Navy brat. I was born in Bethesda, Maryland.
Okay. Now, and Hunter is your real last name, correct?
And no, it isn't. It's
okay.
my stage name.
A stage name. Okay.
When I moved to Hollywood and wanted to become an actress, I used the name Hunter.
Gotcha.
And I kept it, which I like.
And for those that will say, wow, let me go to IMDb and look up her credits.
I'm there as Nancy Hunter.
As Nancy Hunter. And then at one point there was even a brief Ivory Hunter, which was
that's another story.
When I read that, I thought of Ivory.
That's a fun story.
I thought of Ivory Joe Hunter, the singer, and I'm like, wait a minute, Ivory Hunter. I said, I think that's a bit much, but and then
it was a bit much. The whole story's a bit much. It's very funny.
But
I think the readers will get a real kick out of that.
And then Joi, of course, spelled with the traditional J-O-Y, and then, of course, she changed it to J-O-I, which, again, kind of made it, I know as a kid it made it stand out to me. But as I was saying before, was a lot of us will remember her from shows like I Love Lucy, where she appeared a couple of times. Also, a famous episode of, I was talking with the crew, some of them remember, the old Adventures of Superman TV show, where she played an undercover policewoman, and she was under the guise that she had become Mrs. Superman. And of course, to catch some mobster or gang guy. And actually what I read, and I don't even know if you and I talked about this, I was not aware that her appearance was so well received that when they were planning the next season of Superman, which unfortunately never happened because of the untimely death of George Reeves, they wanted her as a regular on the Superman series.
Right. That's an unfortunate thing, because that would have been great for her.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, she was always busy. Now, let me ask, this popped into my head, and I wanted to get it out of the way in the beginning before I forget. Was she a religious person? Because obviously, being from Utah, her family gave the appearance that they were very much into religion.
She was born, her mother was Mormon, and she was born into the Mormon religion, and I believe her mother, as time went by, became Christian Scientist, and Joi Joi wasn't terribly religious. In fact, she was interested, when we were together, she was interested in the Jewish religion, because a lot of the people, a lot of the guys she dated were Jewish, and it was interesting to her. So we went to temple a few times, but the only religion that she really liked was unity.
Gotcha. We're looking here in the studio at a shot of I Love Lucy, or Desi Arnaz on the left, Bill Frawley second from left, Joi in the center shot there. Again, a well-known episode, and actually too, I realized too from your book, I'm jumping ahead a little bit, but to tie in with this image, that later on when Lucy was with Gary Morton, her second husband, that actually they wanted to sign her to a contract, and then her then husband, I hate to say, foolishly nixed that deal.
He nixed it. Unfortunately, a lot of her career issues, I mean, she could have been a much bigger star, Larry, but unfortunately, she dated her managers and was married to her manager, and he said, "Why would you do that? You're too good for that," and killed the deal, which was a terrible, terrible mistake.
Yeah, and when you met her, she was married technically, but really more of in name only. She was married to a gentleman.
They were legally separated in 1965.
Oh, they were.
I met her in 1969, but they were very close. He was like the closest person to her was her grandfather, and Stan was very close. Her husband, the one she was separated from, and she was. It was like Grampy. That was the type of relationship they had.
Gotcha.
Very close. Very, very close.
We're looking at an image here taken from a movie called Bigfoot that you alluded to earlier. I'm going to say that this could be a stand-in gorilla. Again, I'm going to assume it's you and holding Joi. Actually, with your hand. No, that's not you.
That is a great big guy. I think he's like 6'5" or 6'6". He was the actual Bigfoot. I was one of the female big feet.
You were.
I was not a star. I was just one of the many big feet.
Okay, well that would explain why his hand is where it is. Okay, well now that makes sense. So thank you for illuminating that for me. Very good, very good. Although it could have been you, but okay, that explains it.
I don't want to pretend like I was a star.
Now, what I found interesting about that, and we also have an image from the movie, a movie poster, was that it is a movie. I watched a little bit of it, and one of these days I'm going to sit and watch via YouTube or whatever, watch the movie. It is an interesting collection of has-beens, wannabes, and up and coming. I got to tell you, there's two of the Mitchum family. There's Robert Mitchum's son and brother, John Carradine, who of course was a legendary movie actor. A lot of B horror movies, was with Universal back in the day. Ken Maynard, who I think was a cowboy way back when, was in that. You were in it. Joi was in it. There was Jerry Marin, who, God bless him, is
Right.
almost 100 years old as we tape. He was the talking munchkin on The Wizard of Oz. So, I mean,
Right.
this was like a who's who of like almost train wreck. It's amazing. You know?
It was, the whole film was a train wreck. And if you actually can sit through it, you're a better person than I am. Even Joi and I, when we went to see, we met with the producer to watch a screening of it, and my God, we couldn't even handle it. We laughed.
Wow. So it became kind of campy, which a lot of those movies did tend to be.
Yeah, I mean, it's a real stinko.
We're here with author Alexis Hunter, the book Joi Lansing, A Body to Die For, a love story, published by Bear Manor Media. And Alexis also can be reached at, via Facebook/Ms. Alex Hunter for more information. Let's see. Oh, yeah, I mentioned, there was one of Bing Crosby's kids was in there too, Lindsay.
Yes.
Yeah, one of the Crosby
Lindsay was
kids.
in it. Yeah.
Younger generation has no idea what I'm talking about, but believe me, those of us that were kids back in those days know all about all these fine people who had better moments. But for you, it was kind of a start. One other thing too, now because you became involved with Joi and kind of were with her for a period of 4+ years. Did you find, looking in retrospect, I don't think you would say you regretted your time with her, certainly not, but
absolutely not.
But that your career as a result never took off the way maybe it could have, or is that not a thought?
Well, the thing is, when I met Joi and we actually fell in love. It was such a miraculous thing. This was something that was totally out of the blue. It was not her thing, but it became. And I had no interest. I was just so happy to be with her. I didn't care about doing anything with my career.
Okay. Now, as a young person, I'm going to say probably early to mid-teens, you kind of sense that you leaned one way more than the other. Would that be a kind of a subtle way of putting it?
That's true. Okay. That's very true.
And now with Joi, again, I totally get the friendship / in love with each other, but again. Later in the book, and again, I'll read a quote a little later on, there's something where you talk about that in many cases, because of the way Hollywood was, that a lot of females kind of almost paired off with other females. I mean, like it was more common than maybe meets the eye even today.
Yeah, it was very common, especially in the days when the studio system was so powerful. This was before birth control. And they encouraged that behavior with their young male stars and their young female stars. They didn't want them to get pregnant. That was a real complication.
Sure.
So it happened a lot. It happened a lot.
We've got a great photo here I wanted to bring up before we lose it. Joi on the adventures of Ozzie and Harriet with Ricky Nelson, who, of course, in his own day was almost literally a rival to Elvis as a singer, and actually probably did some better movies than Elvis did, but in the long run, of course, there's only one king, but Ricky certainly had a marvelous career. And actually, I digress a little bit. There was a comment in the book that someone once asked Joi, and I'll ask you to kind of illuminate this. Joi claimed one of the most sensual or sexiest men she ever worked with was not Ricky, but actually his dad, Ozzie Nelson, in an episode they did. That's pretty high praise for Ozzie.
She thought he was the sexiest guy she had ever known in the business.
Wow.
I mean, she dated Sinatra. She dated Sid Caesar. I mean, she had an affair with Sid Caesar on the side. A lot of biggies, and she thought that Ozzie Nelson was the sexiest guy she'd ever met.
Thank goodness Harriet didn't find out.
Thank God, my God, that wouldn't have gone over
My
very
goodness.
well.
Now, February 17th, 1969. I think I had a dentist appointment on that day, but why is that an important date in your life, Alexis?
that was, I believe that was the day of the week. That was our anniversary.
There you go. So every for those several years you were together with Joi, that was certainly a big anniversary date, no doubt.
Yeah, it certainly was.
Talk a little bit about Joi's health regimen. I got the impression she was very much influenced in many ways, but certainly Bob Cummings, I think, was an early influence. He was kind of a health nut.
Yes.
When you met her, I mean, it sounded like she was into a lot of supplements, vitamins. Tell me about whether you thought in retrospect that was a good thing or really didn't impact her one way or the other. It
may have been beneficial in a lot of respects. She took at least 20 to 30 vitamins a day. She was a spokesperson for Tiger's Milk. It was a supplement, and she went along with all the teachings of Bob Cummings, and she did all those things. But unfortunately, she did other things that were very destructive. Unfortunately, doctors were not very kind to her, and she had bad luck. And one doctor gave her an open-ended prescription for Premarin because she said to him, she didn't want to grow old, and he said, "Well, you take estrogen." And unfortunately, she was young. She had plenty of estrogen, so it probably was one of the main things that probably caused her demise.
Author
the breast cancer.
Author Alexis Hunter joining us here for the hour on Studio 411. The book Joi Lansing, A Body to Die For, a love story. We just had a shot, I think it was from one of the Matt Helm movies, Joi and Dean Martin, and I think they were in like 2 or 3 movies together. So that was always a good co-star to be alongside, no doubt. One thing too I got from the book was that I really felt by reading the book that because of the highs and lows with, again, you talk about her self-image or poor self-image perhaps, but also the thing with the alcohol and the mixing of the drugs at times, sometimes without even maybe meaning to. I wonder if, let's say you had not been there during those first 2 years at least, if not all 4, to me, I almost think this was another Marilyn or these folks that would be almost found dead because of mixing the improper stuff. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yes, I know. Yes, very much so. I think that probably would have been the case. And I don't know if the cancer that was in her had affected her during that time period. I think probably that's the case. And she would have these terrible depressions monthly. And she would start with scotch, and she had trouble sleeping. So because of the days in the studio, with you take the uppers to stay awake and the downers to go to sleep, and so she had a problem with sleeping. So she took sleeping pills, Seconal and Tuinal and Nembutal and all those.
Now, in her younger days, of course, you weren't with her then. I mean, she was like an MGM girl, so she was back in those days. I looked on some of the films that she was in, even if it was a bit part. I mean, she was Easter Parade and several others throughout the late 40s, 50s. So, I mean, for those who, again, are saying, wow, she sounds familiar. I mean, Joi Lansing basically had, what amounted to well over a 25-year career from one end to the other. And as a matter of fact, we're looking at a photo right now of Joi with the late Irene Ryan, Granny Clampett on the Beverly Hillbillies, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later. But, so she was brought up in that system, and that system is what led Judy Garland and I'm sure countless others, work long hours, take uppers, can't fall asleep, take downers. And then I really got from reading the book that this started a roller coaster that probably went on for a couple of decades until you met her.
Yes, I believe so. I mean, to my knowledge, that was the case. And I had when I met her, I mean, I was so naive, and I didn't understand, and I figured it out after a while. I mean, the first time she had the Johnny Walker Black and the Seconal, it was pretty frightening. It was pretty frightening.
I can only imagine any type of alcohol with, and you well know from, just the national news, the problems with prescription and certainly non-prescription drugs that are going on in this country now. So imagine that, in Hollywood again. In some ways, it ran rampant, and who knows, maybe even still
it was
so.
Terrible.
Yeah,
it was just terrible, and it controlled her life at that time.
Sure.
But once she became secure and happy, she was able to stop doing that, which I am so grateful for. I'm really happy about that.
We're looking at a nice montage of Joi. Of course, I think it's our first, I could be wrong, maybe Kay has one, but Kay Ballard, but Joi Lansing, I think she's our first Studio 411 subject with a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame, so very impressive. And a photo down below here of Eartha Kitt. Now, Eartha, who was a singer-actress in her own right, one of the three Catwomen on the Batman series, she was a good friend of Joi's for many years, correct? Is that you, or is that a dog in the background?
That is one of the dogs. Okay. So I will take care of that little issue.
No problem. No, when we have an animal show, you will be first on my list.
I'll be happy to do that.
We've had guests that if the dog has walked into the shot, I mean, we've had it all. We even have one where if the viewer looks very carefully because of editing, the door opens up, the dog walks in, and then in a blink of an eye, when we go back to the shot, the door mysteriously has closed. So you can imagine what happened there. Before we continue, I want to show a shot so that the folks watching, you are probably, 19 or 20 years old. Is a shot of you and Joi, circa 1970.
I was just 21 when I met her.
21, and Ms. Lansing on the right there. So. Quite a handsome couple, to say the least. Yeah, and
thank you.
Yeah, I'm trying to figure. You have an LP in your hand. Did we ever figure out what that album was? I thought it was.
That was from. We went to a premiere of I think it was I can't remember if it was the Incredible Dr. Phibes.
Oh, with Vincent Price. Gotcha. Okay.
Right.
I thought all this time you were holding a handbag, and now that I see it blown up, I said, "Wait a minute."
No, it was promo stuff from the film.
And Joi was not in that movie, correct?
She was not in the film.
No, I gotcha. But so again, who were some of her? I know you talk in the book that when a woman is as beautiful as Joi was, a lot of times women tend to be jealous, so they don't kind of like bond with each other very easily, unless, like you said, it was because of the studio. But who are some of her close friends that besides yourself and Stan, her estranged husband, during those years?
She was very good friends with Eartha Kitt, and oh my gosh. Most of her friends, she didn't have a lot of close female friends, unfortunately. Yeah. Marjorie Mead was probably her closest friend.
Right.
And Marjorie was best friends with Eartha Kitt.
Now, talk about your meeting with Joey Bishop, the former comedian, talk show host, and what he knew and what he suggested that you do.
Yeah, she was so sweet. She was so innocent. I mean, herself was so different than her appearance. She was very sweet, very innocent, and just a delightful human being. And she wanted me to meet her friend Joey Bishop, and so we went to meet him. And she whispered something to him, and he was so happy to meet the bride. What he said, so cute. And Joey said, "Yeah, I don't like your name. You're not a Nancy." And I agreed with him. And he thought, "You're a Rachel. You should be Rachel." So I became Rachel Lansing, Joi's sister, her kid's sister, which helped hide our our relationship, which we had to do at that time.
Right, and
It
some would
totally
say
unacceptable. Totally unacceptable.
some would
It
say
have
even
destroyed his
today.
career.
Some would say even today that might be the case, but I totally get it back in those days. A wonderful shot here of Joi in performance, nightclub act, probably mid to late 60s, just a beautiful shot, stunning dress, and from what I've heard, quite a good singer, the few clips that I have seen of her. And
she had a beautiful voice. In fact, when we were in New York and she was doing theater in the round, she spoke with a radio producer, and she was going to sign to do an album. And unfortunately, she became ill and couldn't do it.
Gotcha. You describe Joi in the book as an eventual victim of her own beauty and the parasite power mongers, pretty strong words, of Hollywood, similar to Marilyn Monroe and so many others. Again, do you think that has changed the way, maybe because the studio systems are not the way they used to be,
I think it's more big money, big corporations, but I think it still exists. Maybe not on the scale that it did in the 40s and 50s, and the 30s. I think it's a different atmosphere, but I think that it still exists. There's so many young men and women that want to be stars, and it's the most important thing in their lives, and people know that.
Yeah.
And people take it's the same thing in the corporate world. I mean, the people who have the power take advantage of the people who want the power.
We're looking at a shot here of Joi with your old friend and former guest of our show, Kay Ballard and Eve Arden. She was on the appearance of the Desi Arnaz produced The Mothers-in-Law. That must have been a hoot. I don't remember that episode, but
my God, it's great. It's on YouTube.
It is.
So funny.
So I'll have to watch it for sure. Alexis Hunter, author of Joi Lansing, A Body to Die For, a love story, joining us for the hour here on Studio 411. And you talk in the book during a stay where you guys stayed for what turned out to be almost a year. Joi saw a doctor while she was there for a couple of reasons. One was due to a discomfort in her breast. That sounds like that really was the beginning of what led down this tragic path of them realizing.
Yes.
Now, explain for the viewers, again, that in those days, I mean, there were injections being given, whether estrogen in her 30s, we're not talking over-the-counter or prescription pills. We're talking injections that were being done almost at random by, many of these doctors.
What happened is Joi felt her insecurity, and there's so much competition in Hollywood. And Joi was one of the blonde bombshells, but she felt she needed to be more, to stand out more. And at that time, they were doing silicone injections, and not the silicone implants, free floating liquid silicone injections. And that's one of the main reasons why I wrote the book, to stop that practice. They're doing it again, and more people are doing it and don't understand how tragic it can become. I truly believe that is one of the things that, with that combined with the estrogen, caused her death from breast and ovarian cancer. And
you also talk in the book about the studio, again, going back to the MGM days where, they were like, well, your backside needs a little, a little this, a little that. So they started with that as well, to kind of firm things up, shall we say.
Yeah. And now what they're doing is this obsession with large rear ends.
Amazing.
The large rear ends, a lot of it, I believe, is silicone injections.
Wow.
And when I was a kid, when I was with Joi in New York, I unfortunately had one injection of silicone in my breast, and it caused me to lose my breast when I was 26.
So some 4 to 5 years after Joi's passing,
Right,
just from that one experience that she, you have to admit, she encouraged you to a certain degree. That look at the damage that caused to you, and of course that impacted.
Right. And she didn't know; she had no idea.
Sure, no, I get it.
And I didn't, and it unfortunately created a problem that has still caused me problems to this day. I still have autoimmune problems from it because it's still in my body.
Gotcha.
I mean, because it migrates, it goes everywhere. It doesn't just stay in one place.
We've got an image here of who we spoke about earlier, the King, Elvis Presley. I wanted to go to a trip that you took, the two of you, while you were together over in Vegas.
Right.
Again, quite an encounter. You meet the King, you meet Priscilla at that time. Although, I think they were still already married at that point. Della Reese.
They were married.
I mean, and he seemed to dote on Joi, as I got the impression most of these celebrity men did. So I'm sure that probably ruffled a few feathers, but Elvis didn't seem to mind.
No, he didn't. He was so charming. I mean, I still remember him kissing me goodbye, which I will never forget. What a guy.
There you go. Now, and on that same trip, again, this was like a who's who, to a guy like me. You went to see James Brown, which the two of you, that was pretty cool back in the day, the late 60s.
It sure was.
Louis Prima and Keely Smith, I assume at that point they were still together. Liberace, Tina Turner, and one there that I remember very fondly growing up. She was kind of like a one notch below Joan Rivers as a comedian. Was a fine talent named Toadie Fields, and you tell in the book a story where she even did an imitation of Joi up on stage while they were.
Yes, she did. And just a delightful woman. And also Jimmy Durante was there. We went to see him, and oh my God. Steve Lawrence and Edie Gourmet, all these great stars.
Oh, a veritable who's who. Many of whom, not all, but many of whom have passed on. But quite a legacy of work that they left. Joi Lansing, A Body to Die For, a love story by our guest author Alexis Hunter. I almost started to say Alexis Smith, but that would be a compliment as well, because she wasn't bad looking either. So
she's quite a lady.
Yeah, authored by Bear Manor Media, and for more information, Facebook/Ms. Alex Hunter for more information. Tell me about the story when Joi, of course, you saw her perform on several occasions, but there was one time where she got a last-minute call to fill in for the great Lainie Kazan, who many of our viewers would know from Big Fat Greek Wedding fame.
Lainie's fabulous.
Yeah?
Lainie became ill, and they asked her, because Joi was appearing at the Thunderbird in a show called Come Blow Your Horn. And so Joi had, I think, the night that they asked her to perform, the show was dark that she was in, so she was able to cover for her, and it was fantastic. She had a full orchestra, and it was so exciting for her. She just loved it. It was great at the Sahara.
Exactly, yeah. And now, do you think that she ever expressed to you maybe a regret that she didn't pursue the singing end of her career more often than she did, or maybe she didn't? Yeah.
Oh, she did so much. I mean, she did all the big clubs. Her singing career was probably even more impressive than her acting career. She appeared at the Copa, at the upstairs, at the downstairs, great clubs. And clubs all over the country. And she had tremendous reviews because people came in to see her, and they thought they were just going to see her and thought, she's gorgeous, but she could sing. And so she had wonderful, wonderful reviews.
There you go. Share with us, again, I don't know if it started fully with that doctor visit in New York. I think that was more for an injection or two, but share with us when the cancer diagnosis came down and kind of what obviously a shocking development, but how did she take it? How did you obviously were quite visibly in the book upset by it, but I got the impression that she either was masking it or not fully wanting to accept what might be happening.
She wasn't really, because of her issues and the problems with the sleeping pills and the scotch. That was still happening at that time. And I had spoken with Stan, her husband. I mean, they were, and he was probably the person to her besides me. And she knew, but she didn't. I mean, there was never, well, this is it, or no negative anything. Yes, you have a problem, and everything's going to be okay. Is the way everything was handled.
Yeah,
I, on the other hand, knew better, and I was absolutely destroyed.
Oh, sure, and I could tell because with each chapter you kind of ended where, well, it's a wonderful time or a wonderful day, but fewer and far between. I'm saying, and it got more on that end. It got more, from your perspective, got more grimmer as the day went on.
But the good thing, about this is. When she had surgery to see if they could do anything, they removed a very large tumor on her ovary, and then they just sewed her back up, and they told me that too bad, unfortunately. But we'll try chemo. We'll try, and chemo wasn't as advanced at that time. This was in I think 1970,
right,
or 71. I'm not sure. It's 70, and they tried. They didn't think she would make it out of the hospital, but they tried chemo, and she did great. I swear to God, Larry, she did great. We had wonderful times after that. She felt great. She didn't lose all of her hair, and she wasn't in a lot of pain. And our lives went on. It was miraculous.
Sure. Alexis Hunter, to my left here, or your right as you watch the screen, along with Joi Lansing, circa 1970, talking about her friend, Joi Lansing, the book A Body to Die For, a love story, published by Bear Manor Media. You mentioned earlier in the show, it came out very clear. She had a tremendous is not even strong enough a word. She had almost like a pathological fear of growing old.
Yes, she did.
Yeah.
Yes, she did.
Yeah.
She was so afraid because she wouldn't work. I mean, when I met her, she was 39. She was almost 40, and that's almost a death sentence to a sex symbol, a beautiful woman in Hollywood. I mean, a 40-year woman as a has-been is nobody, and she was petrified of growing old and not having the admiration of all the people who loved her,
sure,
or her fans. She was so afraid of losing all that.
We're looking here at an image, Joi, probably around 28, 29 years old, the appearance we mentioned earlier on The Adventures of Superman with the original, well, actually not the original, actually the second Superman, but the one that most people remember most, George Reeves, Joi Lansing with him in that great shot, if folks remember that. We talked again alcohol, prescription drugs. I know at one point, you literally kind of purged, the various residences that you guys, because you guys moved a couple of times to nicer digs. But again, you tried to stay on top of that as much. I found it interesting, the estranged husband, who had then at one point actually kind of took up residency with you guys.
After her surgery.
Yeah.
It worked out great. I mean, we were all very close, and he was not a great husband for her. It was difficult for her career, but they were great friends.
Yeah.
They were really great friends. And Stan, we all moved into the penthouse on La Cienega and Fountain, the Fountain View West at the time. And it worked out great. And we shared the apartment, and Joi and I were together, and Stan didn't know, and we kept everything, as they say now, on the down low, and we were, Stan thought we were just great friends, and I was helpful. I helped her.
Now he passed away. He passed away several years after Joi.
Yeah, he died in 1986.
Oh, so longer than I thought. My apologies. But did he ever come to realize really what the extent of the friendship?
Yes. He asked me after the fact. He asked me a few years after
Gotcha.
She died. We remained very close, and we had lunch one day, and he asked me the question. He said, "Drew, basically, what was your relationship with Joi? Was it more?" And I said to him, I said, "Ben, do you really want to know?" And he said, "Yes." And I said, "Well, Joi and I were lovers." And he was kind of surprised, but he wasn't. It was just like I think he probably always knew, but he just couldn't. It never entered his mind.
Right,
at that point,
gotcha.
because Joi had always been with guys.
Yeah. Looking at a great shot here. I know as a kid growing up, the set of stairs very familiar to most people. That's the set of the Beverly Hillbillies, and Joi in a fabulous evening gown, one of her many appearances on that series. She played what? The wife of Flatt and Scruggs, right? She was, married to one of them in the show.
They called her Gladys Flatt.
Yes. Yeah.
And that was just a play on the fact that she was so abundant.
Yes, hardly that name would not apply. So maybe
it would not.
Maybe the Gladys part. That's about it. Yeah, I get you. Joi Lansing, A Body to Die For, a love story by Alexis Hunter, joining us here for the hour on Studio 411, published by Bear Manor Media. For more information on Alexis and Joi, Facebook/Ms. Alex Hunter. And now I have to caption this photo here. Back in the day when this movie Marriage on the Rocks came out, there was no rating system. So this promotional still that we're showing, they had to put recommended as adult entertainment. Now that's not the same
isn't
as...
that funny?
And
it was so white bread compared to the way things are now.
I mean, it's not like what that phrase means today. It's more or less probably would be rated maybe PG-13, or I don't even think it would be rated R.
There was nothing really. The fact that she was so sexy, I don't know. Who knows?
And to the left, from left, I should say, Frank Sinatra, Deborah Carr, Dean Martin, and then on the bottom in the polka dot bikini, there's Ms. Joi Lansing. So again, another movie that she appeared in with Dean Martin. One thing that Joi, and I assume you probably were proud of this as well, unlike some of the other bombshells of the day, Joi, so the legend goes, never appeared in the nude, either in a movie or pictorial or any. Even though Hugh Hefner did solicit her at one point to pose for Playboy.
Hefner wanted her to do Playboy, but she did not do nude. She did cheesecake. She did sexy bikinis and that type of thing, but she did not appear in the nude.
Tell me about this engagement you went with Joi. It was in Cincinnati, Ohio, and apparently it was an altercation with perhaps a former beau who happened to be a mobster.
Yes, she dated a mobster and before me, and then when he, I think he found out that Joi and I were involved, and he wasn't thrilled about that. So it became kind of difficult.
Yeah, I definitely got the impression there was some unhappiness going on.
He was not a happy camper, and I was a scared camper. So.
And now from that situation to perhaps hopefully a more enjoyable situation, Joi, for a brief time, or maybe longer than I realized, also dated Frank Sinatra.
Yes, she did. She dated him in the early '60s.
Wow! All right, so that was before.
Yeah, they were quite an item. They dated for a few years.
That was before Mia Farrow, correct?
Yes, it was. Yes, it was.
And now in the book you talk about that apparently her early perhaps being enamored with Frank might have waned over time. I guess she portrayed him kind of as difficult or maybe a little too moody for her taste.
Yeah, he was very moody, and that was what killed it.
Yeah.
And she, I mean, she probably had issues too. I mean, but it didn't work out. It didn't work out. She found him to be morose at times and very sad.
Now, this comes to mind, and I'm no medical expert by any chance, but did it ever cross your mind by chance, because it seems to be more prevalent than people want to admit even in today's age, could Joi have been bipolar, or would you say no?
I think there's a good possibility. I think it is, but it may have been caused by the hormonal changes of the ovarian or the breast cancer and all that estrogen, going through her system.
Exactly.
She definitely had issues. Definitely had issues. I mean, I'm certainly not a shrink, and I can't put a label on it, but she had problems.
Now, you talked about earlier a big thrill for you was, getting a little smooch from Elvis. You also danced with Rock Hudson. Now, tell me about that.
Yes, I did. When I was a kid.
How was he?
I was living at the Studio Club with all the young actresses. I lived there when Farrah Fawcett was there and Sally Struthers, and I met a guy who invited me to go to a premiere of Camelot, and I didn't know that we were just going to walk in. He didn't have tickets, and I didn't know until after the fact. And we were there, and Rock Hudson asked me to dance, and it was fabulous. And what a great guy.
And now, obviously, you didn't know him well. It was a chance meeting.
No. It was just a dance.
And he became kind of the poster child for the whole AIDS epidemic, and obviously another example of the studio system that. In the male's case, obviously, a lot of it was cloak and dagger, kind of
yes, it was.
bogus marriage, et cetera, et cetera. So, again, a lot of stuff going on to, keep everybody pure, everybody, the way the studios
and
wanted
under control.
Yeah.
And they forced him to marry someone, and he was involved with another actor at the time. And I believe he had a nervous breakdown after that.
Right.
So, I mean, it was tough. And because everybody had to be someone who you weren't.
You talk in the book. You talk in the book during those studio days where Joi knew Marilyn Monroe, and that Marilyn that Joi actually found her, quote, sweet but a little sad. And then I guess, as you talked earlier, sometimes these folks, would want to maybe spend some time, maybe innocently or maybe not so innocently. But it was interesting that she had perhaps solicited Joi for some personal time. At least that's how I took the quote.
I mean, I'm pretty honored by this. Monroe had asked her to go to Palm Springs with her, and made Joi nervous, and she declined to go. So,
and now when she told you, or she told Marilyn that she had similar offers from women more than a few times, but
yes,
that she didn't lean that way. But then again, I asked that only because, and that's more towards the end of the book, but then here she meets you, and all of a sudden, her world explodes.
Yeah, it was it was just so unexpected, and we were soulmates. That's all I can say. I mean, we would sit and talk for hours and hours and hours and hours, and it was just it was meant to be. That's all I can say. It was meant to be.
Alexis Hunter, author of Joi Lansing, A Body to Die For, a love story, joining us here on the remaining few moments we have on Studio 411. Over time, of course, over the period between 1970 and maybe the late spring of 72, Joi's condition worsened, and then the doctors informed her that the drugs would really no longer do much. And even though she had gone into remission for a time, as is the case with many types of cancers, sometimes that is short-lived. I think at that point, I got the impression that she really started to come to grips that things were starting to go south rather quickly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But she always had a positive spin on everything, and we always kept thinking that because she was never told that what I was told that things were not happening, but we always kept things up and hoping that they would come up with new drugs and everything would be good and everything would be fine. Always happy, always kept it up.
And now, of course, from the early 70s, I mean, there's been some improvement in terms of procedures and drugs. But you mentioned that by today's standards, whether she would have accepted this is another story. But that basically, probably at least the last 6 months of her life, Joi would have probably been, in today's world, would have been put in a hospice.
Probably. Well, not really. We were doing. She was doing pretty well. I mean, she would have episodes of not feeling well.
Right.
But it wasn't terrible. It just that the last few months, she just suddenly, it's like someone threw a switch.
Yeah, I think that's when maybe it hit her. Yeah.
She didn't suffer, Larry. She didn't suffer. It just suddenly she was good, and then suddenly not good.
Yeah. Then, of course, as with many situations, there was and you mentioned it earlier, because of the different religious kind of leanings that her family had. There were some conflicts with burial. I thought I read that she had wanted perhaps to be buried in a crypt or a mausoleum.
Yeah, she wanted to be in a mausoleum, and unfortunately, because I didn't want to dwell on the fact that she didn't have much time, she didn't put it down on paper.
Gotcha.
And so everyone else made decisions, and they went against everything that she wanted. Her mother offered to pay for the funeral, and I mean, it was terrible. It was just terrible.
No, I hear you. And then, again, small consolation, but as we wrap up with you here, it's almost like a kind of a movie story ending. She died in your arms, and
yes, she did.
And real quick, again, I got the impression, I think you spelled it out to me when we spoke earlier, that you kind of held off on the book because, you wanted your parents to kind of,
yes, I did. My parents never would have accepted it. They're very old school and would never have, it wouldn't have gone over very well.
Sure.
So I waited until my parents were gone, and then with all, with all the issues with gay marriage and more acceptance, I thought that people would be a little more open-minded and be to accept the book in a loving way, because that's what it was. It was a love story.
Sure, absolutely.
And it's a similar story to anyone who's ever lost anyone from cancer, or anyone who's loved anyone.
Sure.
I mean, love is love,
Yeah.
and that's what I wanted people to understand. Love is love. It doesn't matter who you love.
Well, we appreciate you taking time out from your busy schedule to join us here
Thanks,
for this episode.
If anyone is interested in the book, it's available on Amazon or Barnes & Noble or through Bear Manor Media.
Very good, very good. BearManorMedia.com, and also Alexis, or Facebook / Ms. Alex Hunter, and get more information on what Alex is up to. Hang in there with us for a second, and we thank not only Alexis for joining us, we thank you for joining us on this episode of Studio 411. The book, Joi Lansing, A Body to Die For, a love story, and we had a great time reminiscing with Alexis.
Aww.
And we thank you for joining us on this episode of Studio 411. We'll see you next time. Take care.